It is the 19th of July, and this day in Baptist history, our reading is Preaching with Fire and Fervor. Our passage of Scripture comes from Jeremiah chapter 20 and verse 11. But the Lord is with me as a mighty, terrible one. Therefore my persecutors shall stumble, and they shall not prevail. They shall be greatly ashamed, for they shall not prosper. Their everlasting confusion shall never be forgotten. The Gum Spring Baptist Church in North Carolina grew out of the ministry of the separate Baptists of that state. And one of the unusual events soon after its beginning is noteworthy. Located in Chatham County between the towns of Pittsboro and Haywood, the Gum Spring Baptist Church was constituted on Saturday, July 19, 1829. We have made reference to the miraculous events that accompanied the preaching of the gospel by the separate Baptists in those days. Oftentimes men would resist the gospel, threatening the preachers with beatings or death if they did not desist from the proclamation of the spiritual truth. On one occasion, the Reverend Dutton Lane, the preacher, was threatened with death by his own father, but God intervened and gloriously converted the elder Mr. Lane. Lane had the privilege of baptizing his father. Also, Shubal Stearns, the father of the separate Baptists, was threatened with whippings and death on several occasions. Such an event transpired also in the life of the first deacon of the Gum Spring Church, Mr. William Drake. Mrs. Drake had experienced a wonderful conversion, and she desired to follow her Lord in baptism. Her husband, however, was much enraged. He had no interest in matters of religion, and he threatened that if the pastor, Elder Isaac Hicks, drowned his wife, he would shoot the man of God. When the baptism took place, Mr. Drake was very excited, and he followed the pastor and Mrs. Drake out into the water to a considerable depth, unaware of what he was doing. Amazingly, as he stood in the water and observed his wife's obedience to her Lord, he fell under deep conviction and went home in great agony. He retired to bed, and for several weeks he was unable to get up. Mr. Drake was in great distress of both body and soul, and he feared that he was going to die. Thus it was that Mr. Drake requested that Elder Hicks come to his home and preach. Though infirm, Mr. Drake was gloriously saved. After receiving the assurance of personal salvation, Mr. Drake said to the pastor, "You must baptize me." The man of God consented to do so in the morning, but Mr. Drake responded, "No, it must be now." Elder Hicks consented. The servants obtained some torches of light wood, and they all set out for the Haw River, which was not too distant. Mr. Drake was unable to walk, so he was carried to the riverside. Following his baptism, he came up out of the water and walked the distance back home. He simultaneously was rejoicing in the love of Christ and was set free from any bodily or mental affliction. His radiant testimony continued, and in time he was selected to serve the congregation as a deacon. These are some words from Baptist foundations in the South, and I quote, "This was the tradition of the separate Baptists. The fire and fervor of the Whitefield revival lived on in them. Their teaching centered in individual conversion and regeneration." End of quote. Frankly, most of the separate Baptists would be a bit uneasy in the refined, sophisticated, suave worship services of modern-day fundamentalist Baptist churches. Brethren, perhaps once again we ought to become more concerned for our ardor than for our order. To God be the glory.